Line loss has a lot of different variables and can change based on load, distance, and cable size. So how do we calculate the maximum length we can run and how many watts we can run on that distance? Let's talk about it. So if you just want to see the formula, skip ahead in the video. I've got timestamps below, but we're going to go over some examples first just so you kind of get the idea. There are many variables to line loss. As you increase the cable length, you increase the resistance in the line. The resistance of the conductor decreases in proportion to its cross-sectional area. The larger the conductor or copper, the less the line loss. And voltage drop varies directly with the load. The larger the amps on the line, the larger the line loss. So my 1200 HMI light has a limit of 100 feet of cable from light to generator, and that's using 12-3 cable and running it off a 2000 watt Honda generator. Any more cable than that and the light strikes, but it won't hold for more than 10 seconds. And keep in mind, this is also including the 50 foot of head cable from ballast to light and wattage of the ballast. So it's probably in the range of 1400 watts altogether and using about 150 feet of cable technically. Over 100 feet, we're losing too much voltage to power the ballast and light properly. The longer the cable run, the more voltage drop. Now remember, 100 feet is technically 200 feet in theory because the electricity has to travel down and back to complete the circuit, but we still calculate based off the actual distance. Voltage drop is also impacted by how many watts or amps you're running on that cable. If you have a 200 foot run with a 1K on the end and you're using 12-3 cable, you'd have around 5.5 voltage drop. If we hooked up an 1800 watt HMI instead, you'd have 9.9 voltage drop, which is not good. We don't want to exceed over a 5% voltage drop from the generator or the power source we're powering from. Anything less than 5% is going to be insufficient to run units with a reasonable, efficient of option. So 5% of 120 volts, which is the US standard, is about 6 volts. So a drop down to around 114 volts max is usually okay. Now there are big differences when running HMI versus tungsten or incandescent units on low voltage. Incandescent units are really fine on any voltage. It has no inductive or capacitive properties and operates at a power factor of 1.0, which is perfect. If you really wanted to, you could run a tungsten unit at 90 volts, let's say. The only thing you're really losing is the output and the color temperature. The light will be fine at 90 volts, but you're going to dramatically reduce the output of the unit, which is effectively dimming down the unit, and with that comes warming up the color temperature. So instead of being in like the 29 to 3200 Kelvin, you might be down in the 2500 range. Depending on what you're going to do with that light on set, it could be fine or maybe it's not. Running incandescent fixtures is fine on low voltage, but it's not the same with any HMI or LED fixture. These have ballast, motors, or coils, and you're going to be damaging expensive components if you run it on low voltage. Any light that has a coil, motor, or ballast is going to create resistance and inductance. This is going to get complicated for a second, but I'm going to try to put it in layman's terms. As the current increases and decreases over 120 times a second, like the sine wave for an HMI light, it creates resistance in the current. As the current increases, the circuit stores energy in a magnetic field or ballast. Then as the current decreases, the circuit gets the energy back. This doesn't really accomplish any work, it just keeps circulating back and forth between the coil and the power source to make the light work. When the current is in the coils, it creates voltage called counter-electromotive force, or EMF. This has the opposite polarity of the applied voltage from the source/generator. As a result, the applied voltage must overcome the induced voltage before current can flow through the circuit. If we look at this sine wave here, it'll make a little more sense. Here is a good sine wave of an HMI light. Now this would be a magnetic ballast sine wave. If this was an electronic ballast, it would be a square wave, and in flicker-free mode, these tops of the waves would be rounded off, but it all still pertains to resistance and inductance. If we introduce inductance current, or noise, the EMF current can lag behind up to 90 degrees, which is a result of voltage drop. Now if we had an electronic ballast, this would be the same thing, but leading the main voltage by up to 90 degrees. This would be called resistance current. So resistance and inductance is basically the same, it's just one's lagging behind the main current and one's ahead of the main current. Inductance for magnetic ballast, which is lagging behind, and resistance for electronic ballasts that are ahead of the current. Hopefully this all makes sense, it's a little complicated. HMI bulbs require a lot of voltage from the ballast to strike the unit itself because of the materials inside the bulb. The ballast boosts up that voltage for when it strikes and also as it's warming up, and then comes down to a reasonable level. If you run low voltage to that light, it might not strike at all, or it might strike and only stay on for 10 to 20 seconds, or maybe more. LEDs use a sine wave form to control their brightness and dimming. This is done through a process called pulse width modulation, or PWM, which is a whole nother topic in itself. So LEDs aren't running the same sine as HMIs, but they do expect a minimum voltage for the ballast and the electronic equipment. So if you're running low voltage over time, you're definitely going to damage some of the LED equipment or or it just might not work after a while. Basically, out of phase, which is inductive or resistance current, is bad, and it can lead to things like failing equipment, overheating connectors, efficiency loss, circuit breaker trips, instability with generators, and a lot more. So how do we calculate line loss and mitigate these problems? There's some formulas we can use to do that in a few different ways. If we refer to these pie chart formulas here, they're all the same formula but changing around using algebra. So you can see we can solve for either finding voltage drop or cable gauge, finding current, finding cable length, or finding resistance of cable. Usually my favorite is finding the cable gauge, as we know how much power we need to run, how long we need it to be, and what kind of generators we have. But we just need to figure out the sizing of the conductor to limit voltage drop. Now let's say, for example, we know we have to run cable at least 200 feet so that the generator is out of camera shot and it's out of audio range. We need to have the ability to power 5,000 watts of lighting or other equipment on that line. We can use this formula. I equals VD, which is the voltage drop, times circular mils, divided by 2 times K. K is the resistance of copper, which is 10.8, and we have to times that by 2 because it's going there and back, the electricity, so that would be 21.6 to simplify it. And L would be 200 feet for the length we want to run. So the formula would look like this. I equals 6 times 26,240 divided by 21.6 times 200, which equals 36.4 amps or around 4,100 watts if we times that by 114 to get our wattage. So no, we could not get that 5,000 watts we want off of that number 6 cable. Now if we up the cable to a number 4 AWG cable instead, and redo the formula, we're only changing the circular mils now to 41,740, which is what number 4 cable is. If we do that formula again, we would be able to run up to almost 58 amps, which is more than enough for a 5,000 watt capacity. So at 200 feet, we'd have 58 amps available, and we would size the generator appropriately to probably a 5,500 or plus running watt version, just to have some overhead as well. Now let's try another example. Let's say we want to calculate for our voltage drop. We know how many feet of cable, the cable size, and how many amps we plan to run. We need 200 feet of cable with number 4 AWG, which is 60 amp baits, and we want to run at least 60 amps. We take the formula VD equals 2 times K times I times L divided by CM. If we plug that all in, we get a 6.2 voltage drop, which is at the max voltage drop I would prefer, but if we only ran 50 to 55 amps, this would probably be fine. And you gotta realize this formula is based at running that full 60 amps at that moment. So if you're only running like 30 amps or something, the voltage drop is not gonna be 6.2, it's gonna be like 4 or 5 instead. So just keep that in mind when doing these calculations. These formulas are super helpful and they can allow you to get a lot of power issues solved after doing some pre-scouting for pre-production. And another thing to keep in mind is as you decrease the voltage, your lights are going to require more amperage because the voltage is down. So if we had a 1K at 200 feet with a voltage drop of 6, so 114 volts, we're using 8.62 amps. But if we put a 2K HMI on instead, we're pulling more watts, which will lower the voltage from the source. Let's say down to 110 volts for this example. Now we would be pulling 20 amps on the dot. And you can find that by using the West Virginia formula. I went over this in another video. Very simple formula, it's good to know. So even if you were able to run 20 amps on 110 volts for an HMI, you're gonna overload that cable if you're using 12.3 cable, which is max for usually 20 amps. That could lead to overheating the cable or connections or just melting down the connections entirely. It's always good practice to keep under the maximum of what a cable says it can do. So if it was rated for 20 amps, usually try to keep it around 18 max. If you have to go to 20, you have to, but it's good practice to keep it under that maximum load. Some large generators or tow plants have an option to increase the voltage straight from the source. This is very handy and can generally allow up to 5% increase in voltage, but any more than that, you could risk destabilizing the generator and its components. So we could send 126 volts from this Geni and end up with 120 at the end of the line, depending on the length and the amperage pull. Pretty cool feature, but again, usually it's only on tow plants or more expensive generators. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know this was a long one, but I hope it's a lot of useful information for you. In my next video, we'll talk about tow plants and cam lock and all that comes with that. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like, subscribe, helps me out. We'll see you next week.